information. And today it will be all about the design awards. So my name is Beas Polidoro. I'm a principal at Fisher Architecture, and I'm also the vice president of AIA Pittsburgh. And as such, I am the chair of the Design Awards for 2021. So first of all, I want to share how excited I am for the next upcoming season of the Design Awards, which will be in person, completely in person. It will be, yes, woo-hoo-hoo. All right. It will be held on September 30th. Mm-hmm. And the work that happens behind the scenes is absolutely incredible. And the thing is, this event keeps growing. So even all the machine behind is, you know, every year it's a moving target. And of course, due to the last year's circumstances, the pieces are moving even faster. So please be patient as we nail down the very details of the location, for example. And for example, also the official submission requirements will be shared by Kira towards the end of the week, this week. But like today, we can already tell you like a few things about this Design Awards. For example, we will keep the same PDF project presentation requirements aligned with AIA Pennsylvania, so that it will be easier to participate in both awards with the same projects. We will have the same dedicated submission software, so that it will be easier to avoid mistakes and uniform, you know, apples to apples, all the submissions. And we will integrate once more the framework for design excellence measures, but we will not use the official spreadsheet. We will not require a lot of data. It will be more like last year. And again, the goal is to make things easier. The categories will be the same as last year. We will have architecture small for projects less than 5,000 square feet, architecture medium, 5,000 to 50,000 square feet, architecture large for projects bigger than 50,000 square feet, and then we will have the category of architecture and unbuilt. Let's not forget the Young Architect Studio competition. Please, if you are an emerging professional, or if in your firm you have emerging professionals, stay posted for that competition as well as part of the Design Awards, and they know that it's getting ready as well. So today we will gain valuable insights from multi-time juror and jury chair, Mike Gwin, and he's also a friend, and my previous boss, at Rothschild Doyno Collaborative. We will also get professional tips on photography and image presentation from award-winning architecture photographer Ed Massery, also a friend. And last but not least, we will learn about the common submission mistakes and jury feedback from our executive director, Michelle Fanzo. She will also tell us a little more about the sustainability and design excellence requirements of the framework that I mentioned before. Again, you already encountered that last year, but Michelle will tell us a little more about also why it is important. So before I let our guests talk, I just wanted to tell only one quick anecdote about my own experience when I did a jury at the 2016 AIA National Design Awards. Believe it or not, there were a lot of submissions with very poor graphics, and I even found one that had all the placeholder text like lorem ipsum dolor sit amen, every single page. It looked great, but the text was all the placeholder. So anyways, I hope never to see that again. But Mike will help us in making your submissions much, much stronger. So Mike, thank you very much. Take it from here.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, thank you so much for hosting this, and to the AIA for putting this on. It's a really timely and meaningful session to do, as we're all thinking about the months ahead, the next couple of months, putting together submissions for the local AIA Pittsburgh Awards program, which is also maybe the same conversation here for any awards program that you're considering entering your work into. There's a framework and an approach to a broad array of awards projects and submissions that have similar content and a similar approach. So I guess through this, I would also encourage you all and encourage our Pittsburgh community of designers to also look beyond Pittsburgh and understand that the effort you put into the local submission here can be paid forward into other submissions, helping further our whole community here as Pittsburgh design community. So think about that. So there's a scale of all these conversations. Over the years, I've been fortunate enough, and in recent years, to be part of 6 juries. Some of those I was jury chair, some of those I participated as a jury member, and in others, much like you, Bea, I had convened the jury and gathered a group. Michelle and I overlapped in doing that with AIA Pittsburgh, and even going back longer would actually be with Ed Massery. Ed and I, Ed, I won't say how many years, I'll just say more than 15 years ago, and you might not even remember, you and I did a session with Build Pittsburgh to talk about putting together an award submission. So it may be quite some time, but I'd have to say, even just kind of remembering that, back when I was in the role of putting together more submissions for projects that I was working on, that a lot of the fundamentals are still true. A lot of the things that we would have talked about 15 to 20 years ago are still very relevant in how you put together a submission today. So there are things that are timeless, but then there are also things that are of our time. So we also have to pay attention to what's going on in the world around us as we think about putting together submissions and demonstrating, why architecture matters, why is it important. So there are a lot of conventions to put into play that can be adjusted from year to year. The AIA chapters also put time into that, thinking about the categories and the content, because the categories and the description of them are elevating aspects of architecture and design that are meaningful and important, and it demonstrates how our field is relevant. So there are metrics that really become the core of these programs. So today, I'm not going to show any images of things that I worked on or things that I reviewed in juries. I'm going to just talk about some of the fundamentals to kind of give you a picture of the process and how a jury would evaluate work, and some of the tips and tricks that are just really essential to keep on your mind as you put things together. So to start with, how does the jury come to be? How does the jury get gathered? And often a jury size is about 3 to 5 people, right? So I think you need at least 3 people for any good conversation, or to be able to have a good dialogue. 5 becomes kind of a critical mass. And with that, putting together a jury, you're looking for a diverse group of people, people in different experiences in the profession, a range of work, people with different backgrounds, often academics or in related fields connect into juries as well, and also people that have a diversity in the range of years and experience. So looking for that sort of multi-generational approach and review of things. So the importance of that is that it creates a strong dialogue and a broad perspective and platform where you have some jury members that might be an expert in a particular area and others in a different. So even while we submit to specific categories, that Bea described, that whole group is looking at every single project. And so we're looking at that holistically. So even while you're looking at a specific category, you're being reviewed in sort of the broad context of architecture. Every project is. And we do that with every project. It starts with a first round and often goes to a second round in that review. But you have to remember that any jury member is often volunteering their time to be part of this, and they're very busy professionals, and they have a limited amount of time. So that's probably the first lesson in putting together a submission, is that you have to understand that your audience has to be able to review and clearly understand a project in a matter of minutes, so that it can't be overwhelming. It can't have everything that you can think of. There has to be a process of editing that down to be a clear, concise sequence of information. It's probably one of the most fundamental things to be aware of, is the time frame that your projects are being reviewed. And that while you want to do a 100-page novel, really the short form, the little essay is where you need to be in putting it together. You have to communicate the whole narrative effectively. So that's really important. Another aspect recently is that submissions are being reviewed online. This is something different from the past. You actually, now all of the submissions get collected and shared to the jury before the actual convened session. So what that means is that the jury members now actually have more time on their own to actually read the narrative and read the descriptions. So understanding the content of what you write about is very important now too. And we often reference that too. So that with more time to review and prep going into a jury session, you'll find that individual jury members are doing deeper dives into the submission. So that content is really important in what you write about as you put together a submission. But every project goes through a first round, and that's one of the fundamental things in a jury review. You might have 2 rounds. You typically always have 2, maybe 3, but you have to understand that they're looking at a range of somewhere between 20 to 100 plus submissions. Actually, Pittsburgh is one of the larger chapters, and being part of juries on a number of AIA chapters, some of them were down into the 20s, and Pittsburgh is over 100, and some of the others are as well. So you have to think that a jury is looking through up to 100 submissions within a day's session, right? You know, they're all human beings, they get tired. And you might have 2 sessions that could be up to 4 hours, morning and an afternoon session, or a couple sessions that are a couple hours. And that's probably the average in the review time. You might have 2 rounds, a first round that's a couple hours and a second round that's a couple hours. And in that time frame, they have to quickly assess and filter all the projects. So you really have to convey what's strong with your project quickly. If you convey that it's hard to understand what your project is, it's probably not going to make it to the second round. So again, clear communication is really, really important in how you go about what you're showing. So the introduction for any jury is the criteria, and the criteria that you look at to craft your submission is the starting place for all juries too. They all look at that criteria, and continually through the submission reviews, they're looking at that criteria to see how well you matched up with that, because those are the aspects of design and architecture that were elevated, and we're looking for excellence in those categories. So you really need to be mindful of that, and continually, while you're editing your own submission, look back at the criteria and see how well you're doing. The other thing that a jury always looks back to, particularly in deliberations when we're trying to understand if a project really has made it to that next level, is that we'll go back to and read the overall narrative that describes the project, because in that narrative you really need to describe, you know, what is the necessity of the work, what's valuable about it, and how you created a successful outcome. And I found that most recently in a jury a month or 2 ago, we continually went back to those, looking at how to make selections. Like, well, is this project really accomplishing what the need was or what it set out to do? And if you have somebody writing a narrative and somebody putting together a graphic, and those 2 people, if they are more than one person, are not talking to each other, if those 2 things aren't aligned and supporting one another, it's another sort of trigger point that the submission might not be a strong candidate. So we're talking about that because I think it's easy for architects, myself included, or any of us, to only have a certain amount of time to put together things, but don't underestimate the importance in what you write about as you put together a submission as well. Because those 2 things, the awards criteria and the narrative that the project team put together, are always referenced in every submission. So think of yourself as a juror too. That's another lesson. As you're putting together your submission, try to remove yourself from it and think of yourself as a reviewer, and see if everything that you put in is really essential, if it really matches up to what you're trying to convey. But probably if there's one takeaway here, remember the word edit. Edit, edit, edit. Edit often, edit regularly, edit early. The better you get at that, and this is where the more submissions you do, and it's a year after year and different programs, the better you get at this step. And the better you get at editing, the better your submissions get. So it's really important to remember, it's not about showing more than the other submissions or everything about your project. It's about editing it down to what is the most important, the strongest aspect of your work, and clearly communicating that. So that often means taking things out of your submission. You only have an average of 12 to 16 pages. You have to make the most out of every single page, because every single page in that submission matters. If you have 10 to 12 good pages and then several bad pages, it really takes you off the mark, because we're looking at the whole project. And while some aspects might be strong, if you show aspects that are really weak, which you can see in images or drawings or in the narrative, it really lowers the mark for the work that you're doing. So edit well, edit often too, because it's easy to get personally attached to the work that we do, and we want to share, we want to show people everything that you did, but you really have to be able to edit it down to the most important things, which often means taking things out. Space can be a good thing in the submission as well. During the review, we're really looking to try to understand if it is a good project, a good work of art and architecture all the way through. So we're looking at this, and we're looking at it in every page. So every page is very important. And you have to think about putting this together like you would put together a book or a movie or a song. You're composing this, and you have to sequence it. And you have to sequence it in a way that a jury can review it in maybe 10, 15 minutes tops, and understand things, including the context of the situation. How does the project relate to its surrounding? What is the situation that you're working with? What's the need for the project? How do you creatively respond to that need with your solution? Is it successful at multiple levels? Is it more than a one-liner? So is the overall successful, the part, and then the detail? If a project can resonate at all those levels, there's a strong chance that it's going to stand out from the rest. And then is there any aspect of innovation or experimentation? Or how does the project have an impact on something bigger than the own work of architecture that you're doing? All of those things are looked for in the review submission. And if a project holistically excels at all of those, it's going to find itself in that honor category. If it excels in any one particular aspect, it might find itself receiving a merit. So it's okay to understand if your project is exceptional at a whole level, and broadly, you can show the project and how well it covers every aspect that we would be looking at. And it's also at the same time okay to say, I know this is the strong aspect of the project, and I'm going to hone in and focus on that. And that's really the kind of the big thing. You have to be honest about what's strong in the project and focus on that. Again, I guess that goes back to the editing step. But there's another aspect which I would call the big three. There are three components to your submission that you have to do well: text, images, and the drawings. All three of those are important. All three of those carry a lot of weight in the submission, and they need to be going together. So on the text, it's important that the text is clear and concise. You have to edit down the words. It has to communicate the key points that you're doing, and it has to align with the graphic submission. So text needs to support the graphics. The graphics need to be doing that, because those things really need to be working together. It's really important. And I have to say, in years of reviewing projects on juries, that is one aspect that is underserved. As architects, we are not writing well enough to describe our work, and we need to be better at that. And it shows. The ones that do it well will often stand out. And that's probably more so in recent years than in the past, because we now, as individual jury members, have time to review and read all of those words online before we convene for a jury. Images, Ed's going to talk about images. Images are second to none, very, very important. And for one fundamental reason, that we as human beings, being the reviewers, can process images very fast. We can process a whole story in one image, and we can know if something is good or not. We're, as a visually oriented field, we're all very good at processing information quickly through images. So if you think about what's really important to get to that second round, I have to have selected the best image and clearly communicate what's strong about my project. So images are extremely important. and they should convey things in two ways. They should talk about the technical proficiency of a project, like architectural conventions, detailing, resolution, follow through. Those things should show up in the images. But equally as important, if not more, is that the essence of the project should show up in an image. That's one thing that can really grab the heartstrings of a juror or any human being, right? When you visit architecture, does it have something that resonates to you? Does it grab you? Is it memorable? Is it evocative? Is it compelling? And that is the beauty aspect of architecture as well. So those are different ways that photography or imagery can help you in your submission. And you want it to be successful in both of those. And then drawings and diagrams, I'd have to also say that there's less care in using a drawing effectively in a submission these days. There are aspects of it, the traditional site plan, floor plans, building sections are not getting the care that they really need to communicate a strong idea. So I would emphasize that if you're putting in drawings, make sure they're compelling drawings that really communicate the idea. You have to be able to read a drawing like you read an image to understand what's important about it. And more submissions recently are putting less care in that, and it really hurts them. New aspects of being able to diagram ideas is taking off. So some of the traditional ways of drawing are being less prevalent, but diagramming, three-dimensional modeling and axos and selective diagramming has become an increasing way to effectively communicate ideas or systems approaches to projects. So point here is that all three of those are important, and you have to really think about all of them. So, these are some fundamental things to think about. And probably the most fundamental, though, is to remember that a good submission doesn't start when you begin putting the graphic submission together. It starts a year or two earlier when you start designing the project. Good submissions are selected as winners in demonstrations of excellence in architecture because they are strong works of architecture. So really, you have to really be doing good work and then communicate it well. So I would say that you can't solve the whole thing in a month or two putting together a submission. It really needs to be, the submission is a simple communication of the outcome of your successful work in the years before it. You'll see that as a repeat pattern when you see firms or individuals that have a repeat success, and it's not as much about the submission as it is about the work that's going into it, and that the work is a demonstration of excellence in our field. There's a value aspect to this too. We're not only doing reviews and juries to select pretty projects. We're doing these reviews to increase dialogue and to have meaningful conversations in our field. The juries that are selected are having good deliberations about what it means to be doing strong architecture and what matters. And we get to good conversations about what matters in architecture. And your work is what's kind of hosting that conversation. So the better work that we do, the better our field moves ahead and the bigger impact we have as a profession. So there's meaning in doing this, and it's exciting to be part of it. So those are kind of my thoughts on this. Remember to edit. Yeah. And then to connect with Ed Massery next. I'll hand it over to Ed.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to speak with you all. I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully this will be constructive and useful. One of the things that was interesting that Mike recently said about start planning ahead your design submission a few years ahead of time, especially when you're in the design process. I used to tell architects back in the days when I did a tremendous amount of supplemental lighting, please consider putting in as many receptacles as possible throughout the space, because when we have to run cords through the photographs, it really makes our lives a lot more difficult. But I still do supplemental lighting, and I still look for receptacles, and I still find them few and far placed throughout a project. And I'm like thinking, they weren't considering me. But anyhow, so I'm going to put this into perspective of, with regards to the architectural photography. is not only how you want to present yourself to an award submission, but it's equally important in very parallel to how you present your work to clients, because, you know, potential clients, especially because you get this limited opportunity to present your work, you know, both who you are as well as the work that you've done. And a lot of times, you know, they're going to key in on the simplest things. And like Mike said earlier, it's the visualizations. And photography is very key on that. So whatever you think about photography for a design award, it's also equally important is for what you're sharing with the client, because most of the time, just like in a design award, the judges will never be able to visit the site. Potential clients will never visit the site of a project that you're trying to use as a representation. So the photography has to tell that story. So architectural photography is actually storytelling in itself. And that's really critical, because you get a very short period of time to make that visual presentation, and they may be listening to you, but once they start looking at photographs of a particular project that may be pertinent to what you're trying to do for them, they're going to start keying on those photographs more than listening to you. So it's important that those photographs have an impact on what they see. And what you may notice is that the longer they pause and look at a particular photograph, that's great, because that means that they're now more interested and they're spending more time at it. I think the thing with websites, if someone spends a minute or something on that website, you're lucky. If they spend several minutes on that website, they're more likely to make a purchase because they've spent that much time on it. So if you have a potential client looking at your photographs of your project, they're going to more likely remember you and remember the project and think about you when it comes time to making a decision. I think a lot of this thing, I'm no expert, but I think a lot of it is just subconscious at working. And we're really trying to reach people subconsciously by, putting imagery in front of them. And I think, going back to an award competition, it's the same thing. If a judge sees a striking photograph, for example, they may spend more time looking at it. And then they may go back through your binder and want to find out more about, the site plan based on how that photograph represents it. And just having them be engaged longer is always to your benefit. I always think of it that way. So when I'm visiting a site with a client, or if I'm doing a test shoot for a client, I think about, the story of the project. I try to gather as much information ahead of time by looking at site plans, floor plans, renderings that you might have created, because renderings are those pieces that you try to share with the client to say, hey, look, this is ideally what we'd like to build for you. And if the building comes out close to it, or very similar to that, it's great to actually go back and make a photograph that kind of conveys that and say, hey, look, here's what we designed. This is a rendering of what that design looked like. And this is a photograph from that same perspective. So all those kind of things really, help with the subconscious visual impact that photography makes on it. So, yeah, I think I kind of reiterated my point there. It's just really key getting under someone's subconscious mentally by visual elements. So let me start. I put together some PDFs. Can I share my screen now?
You can.
Okay. Bear with me. Can you all see this?
No, not yet.
Okay, good.
How about now?
Yes.
Good?
Mhm.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, good. All right, so I have a series of projects that I put together as an example to show sort of like both that can be used for a presentation to a potential client as well as a submission to an awards submission. Now, you may not use every photograph in this series, but what's interesting about this is that for both a potential judge or potential client, they can actually walk through a space and get a sense of what it might like to be there. Because as I said earlier, most of the time, chances are very small that they'll ever visit the space. So you want to make that impact through photographs. So this was just a office space. Hold on, my tab came down and blocked my arrow.
Mhm.
Sorry about that. Try this again.
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to go this way because the tab at the top keeps falling down in front of the arrow key. All right, so this is a office project. Now we enter the project from the outside, from the elevator corridor, and move into the space. And we can see from the previous photograph to this one, the transition into the space itself. Now, the next photograph, I want to relate the lobby to the rest of the space, or the main community part of the space, which is very important for this particular design. Moving down that corridor, you can see a library space, and beyond that, a kitchenette. From an opposite perspective, you could see someone using that space and how much color they used within the space itself. Now, from the other side of that library, looking back, you can see the open work concept, the collaboration space, things like that, and how with the garage door brought up, you can see again how that space opens up even more, allowing for a lot more, even more flow through the space. And then a reverse angle showing the rest of that space. So it's basically, as I went through this, I hope you got the sense that it's all about, the story that you see by seeing all these kind of, I think it was 8 photographs total, but you can get a sense as to, how you would feel if you actually walked through that space. And you're trying to convey that to a potential client as well as a juror. Next project is a residence. I just picked projects that I thought would kind of speak to a whole range of different architects. You may do office space, residential, so on and so forth. So this was a family room. And this photograph shows, again, that same piece of furniture relating to the open kitchen. And from here, you can see reverse angle showing the kitchen and back to that family space. The dining room from 2 different perspectives. And if you look through that opening shows you it's a music room. And then from the music room, we looked back and you see the dining room again. So it's really helpful for people to see, how all these different rooms relate, how they're interconnected, how the flow might be. And I think if it's just in this particular case, if it's just a homeowner, it's really helpful for them because they're not going to look at a site plan of this and look back and forth. and if you're explaining this to them, how it works, you have these visual images that allow them to quickly, migrate through the space. You might recognize this project, Mike.
Oh.
So what I want to talk about here, what's interesting is when Mike and I decided to photograph this, we talked about it in the fall of the previous year. And we decided that because there's so much heavy foliage in the summer months, that it would be very difficult to see the home. So we ultimately decided to begin the photography in the winter months when all the foliage was gone. And we actually waited for snow because we felt that it would accentuate and help separate the building, the home, I should say, from the rest of the forest.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, we did most of the winter photographs first. Well, we did all the winter photographs first, but we did them in the dusk light because, again, it just helped make the building pop out. And let's face it, the visual impact of this kind of stuff, these kind of images, really grabs people's attention, and it makes them think, wow, I really like that. I want to look at it longer. While Mike's trying to pitch the next house, they're looking at the photograph, just falling in love with the idea of maybe what he's going to design for them is going to look just like this. Or if a judge is looking at that, they'll look at it longer and they'll think about how he used the site, how he fit the house into the site. They'll try to figure out, did he actually, how much, changes did he make to the landscape, or did he actually work within the landscape itself, which is part of the story that Mike and I talked about. And in this particular case, he did very little manipulation of the landscape and used what existed to put the house on it. So what I'm going to do here in this next series, I'm just showing you both the winter and the spring versions of these photographs. The spring photographs actually took place about 4 months later. And we actually, for consistency and make it easier for a viewer, we pick the same angles as much as possible, because it also helps people relate to different seasons and how their house might experience the seasons. And this last project, this project is an exterior project, an outdoor project. It's actually a landscape project. It's in Cincinnati, Ohio. And what's interesting about this is it's a somewhat difficult project to photograph because it goes up a hillside. So you can't really get any great perspectives to see a whole lot of it as far as juxtaposition without using a drone. In this particular case, I used a drone for a lot of the photographs. But the first 3 photographs I'm showing you are actually just taken from the ground to give you the perspective of, say, a walker on this staircase. And then these are taken with the drone to give you that elevated bird's eye view. And again, I liked to photograph the same composition in different lighting environments because it really changes how someone feels about being in that space or experiencing that place. And then obviously we shot it again throughout the dusk, again from the ground. So if I have a little bit more time, I'm going to jump into something else that kind of was important. And Mike talked about those elements that grab someone and help them remember it, a particular project. The first project here, the top one, is the cancer center that IKM designed. Now, I had taken a series of test photographs, and this test photograph was one of the ones that I had shared with them. They weren't really key on it because it focused in their minds too much on the older building behind it. And I said, well, I understand it, but it's a great context shot. It shows the relationship with your project with the building, the environment that it's in. Mm-hmm. And I said, but they thought, well, it overshadows it. I said, I'll tell you what, if we do it as a dust shot, we get the lights on inside and we downplay the older building behind it, your building will pop out. It'll look like it melts into the campus. And that's part of what's important, that it is part of the campus, rather than being something that sticks out, but yet it marries and it fits in very well. So ultimately, they agreed for me to go ahead to do it, and this is the result that I gave them. The images below, one on the left was a test photograph that I had made in, I think, February. And when we went back to photograph this project, I wasn't sure if I knew the sun wasn't going to be in the same place, but I knew that I needed to have the sun coming into the space again, in order to have the dynamic feel that I knew could potentially happen. And the one on the right is the final photograph. So the difference is from February to late July. So you can see how the sun at close to sunset changes. Actually, it's about 60 degrees between winter and summer solstice. And let me just go through a quick some projects that you know, they weren't glamorous projects, but having a photograph like, for example, like this, you know, this is it's very nice in the daytime, but what happens when you shoot it at dusk like this, for example, you get transparency and you get more isolation of the particular project itself. It tends to pop out, become, you know, just has more of a statement, more of a presence, I guess to say, in the photograph. Here's an interior shot. Same thing. I really, you know, told the client that, you know, we really need to shoot this in a way that we get this, you know, this two-story space that you can fall down through the space and almost fall down into the river. And the way to do it was to shoot it at dusk. So this is one of the key shots in this particular project, and it's memorable. And if someone saw this, would be like, wow, that's just like, you know, I want this guy, I want this person, this architect, to design his next project for me. Now, this is a last one here, and this is the Meadowcroft rock shelter. I had talked to the architect about this, saying that, you know, we need a photograph that really sets the project, separates it from its environment, but yet you still seeing it in its context of its environment. This is actually, you know, the photograph that it's a daylight photograph from the same angle. It's very useful, but it's not this photograph. This photograph makes this project just like jump out of the its environment. And this actually photograph ended up in Smithsonian magazine when they were talking about the having an article about the Meadowcroft rock shelter. So I mean, these kind of images were memorable, and the fact that the Smithsonian saw all the photographs from this series, which was about 40 of them. This is the photograph, the only photograph they used to illustrate this particular project in the magazine. That's my dog and pony show. If you have any questions or comments.
This might be a good time for me to jump in, just because I know some of you are going to have to leave right at 12:30. So I'm going to encourage everybody to put your questions into the chat, even as I'm speaking, right? So we can have time to address them. Questions to any of us, Mike, Ed, or myself. So I'm just going to leap into, so some of the things that I can talk about, Mike has covered and Ed has covered. So I'm going to fill in with what you haven't heard yet. And then I'm also going to put into the chat like a dozen tips, just like really short tips that you can copy and paste and bring back to your offices, so you have something to take away if you haven't been taking notes or you don't have time to take all the notes. So let me just start with common, I hate to say the mistakes, but things that could have been better in submissions, because I've now sat through 4 different juries of AIA submissions. And I see sometimes the same type of things happening over and over again. So number 1, building on what both Ed and Mike have said about story, right? You're telling people a story about your project. There's a narrative there. Unclear narrative. People don't know what they're looking at. And specifically where I see this happen the most is in with projects that are renovations and adaptive reuse. Sometimes there's no before photo for the renovation. And I hear the jury say, but what part of this thing I'm looking at did they do? Right there, they can't judge your submission because they don't know what they're looking at. They don't know which parts you did. And if you bury it at the bottom of your text where you say, but I explained it at the bottom there, don't guarantee that there's no guarantee that they're ever going to get that far, because they might have 100 submissions and they didn't read every single word. So if something is really critical to people understanding your submission, put it up front, put it in bold, get it written across the photo. I have seen some submissions where the before and after are literally in the same slide, right? Side by side. Help people understand your story. Don't assume that your viewer knows anything about your project or the location in which your project is. Say it's Pittsburgh or somewhere in our region. Sometimes we have juries that are from the West Coast or New England, right? There's a lot of context that they may not understand. Other element, incomplete submissions. So this is an easy one to fix, right? Just read the criteria, make a checklist, make sure that you've got everything in there. Sometimes we see submissions that you can tell were rushed. This is probably why something's missing, right? So start earlier than you think you need to. Worst case is you're done days ahead, weeks ahead of when you need to, right? Better that than incomplete submissions, which cannot be judged. Another somewhat, can't say common, but it happens from time to time. Part of the criteria says, please do not have the name of your firm in any of the photos, right? And there's usually one a year. We've had one with a great shot of the reception desk with the name of the firm in like giant letters behind it. That is inadmissible and cannot be judged, right? Because it's supposed to be neutral. We're not supposed to know who did it. It's the work that is supposed to stand out. So please review your submissions for things like that, right? Or if you have a well-known firm principal and he's in the middle of the shot, no, that doesn't work either, right? Try to keep it neutral. Some jury comments, in addition to those common challenges, some jury comments I've heard in the last couple of years. If you have budget constraints, explain them, right? You don't have to write a book about it, but let people know, because sometimes people will look at a project and they'll see a good project and say, gee, I wish they did this and I wish they had done that, and that would have made it a great project. And what they don't understand is you were working with $100,000, right? You need to put that in there, or something to help them understand what type of constraints you might have had that fed into your decisions about the project. The other thing I've heard for the last 2 years, more sustainability, right? They want to hear about sustainable aspects of your work. And that's a whole range of possibilities. You could do a simple renovation on a kitchen and bathroom, and there's a way to talk about the sustainability of the appliances that were chosen, or the materials that were chosen, or heating and cooling that is now going to be less expensive because of, you know, some other choices you made around the windows or the roof. It doesn't have to be, you know, a LEED Platinum type of project for jurors to understand, right, the importance of even subtle decisions that you might make within any size project at any budget. Let's see, are there any questions in the chat yet? Okay, let me just say a couple more things, but please put your questions out there. Just some tips that maybe Mike and Ed haven't covered completely, but I think, Mike, you said this, and I'm going to say this again because it's so important. When you put your submission together, think like a juror, not like an architect, right? Think about your audience and how little they know and how little time they have and how much they love good design. Those are the three things that I see, right, happen in juries, is that they have to move relatively quickly. They don't have time to search for critical information if it's not easily visible. And boy, do they love good design. You know, they get really excited, as Ed was saying, like you show them a photo that is just brings out the best aspects of your project, and they will slow down. They will slow down and take more time and look and talk about it. When you're trying to figure out this balance between how much do I say and then how much do I edit back out, right? How do I know when enough is enough, or how do I know when less is more? One tip is if you can diagram or draw something, do that before writing text, right? Go for the visual and then let the text support, because your brain takes in a lot more information visually, faster, much faster, right? What else can I tell you here? Another tip when you're almost done, or you think you're done with your submission before you hit the send button to our office, get somebody else to take a look at it. Somebody at your firm that had nothing to do with putting the submission together, your spouse, some kind of third party, especially if they're relatively neutral, and especially if they're outside the firm and haven't seen this project before. They will be able to give you a window into the way a jury thinks by saying, gee, I don't quite follow the story, right? Because so much is embedded in our heads about what we know, we forget what other people don't know. Share the credit, right? So as we all know, architecture is a team sport. Please include the names of all the people that you would like to give credit to when you submit. Sometimes, we see that it's not there, and we know that maybe you were in a hurry and you forgot, but please put everybody in there that should get credit. And if you don't succeed with a design award, right, try again. One thing I will also say from sitting on a couple different juries or watching juries debate, each jury has its own unique personality, which creates a certain level of subjectivity. Right. And so what one jury just didn't see as exciting, next year a jury could really, really appreciate. So submit often, submit to diverse types of award opportunities. And maybe one last thing I will say, the Framework for Design Excellence, I hope everybody is familiar with this, AIA's. So this originally came out of the COAT Top 10 measures. You can use that framework. There's 10 elements, right? You could use that as an outline for how you write your, sorry, I got cars, how you write your submission, right? Especially, so we encourage, and we'll do the same thing this year, we are encouraging people to pick at least 5 of those measures and write how your project in some way manifests or speaks to those measures. If you can do that, or you can do more than 5, why not just make that your outline, right? And that takes some of the thinking about how do I talk about sustainability out of it. Very often we'll see a sustainability paragraph at the very bottom of somebody's text. And again, jury doesn't often read that far. And B, it also sends a message that you think sustainability is the least important thing. And we know that isn't what you're really thinking, but that's how it comes across in a submission. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and entertain any questions.
There is one from Stephen Winnickoff that asks, to what extent does one tailor a submission to the jury? For example, does it matter if the jury is coming from San Diego or Boston?
I can add into that one, and thank you, Stephen, for asking that. I was trying to figure out how to word that in the message so it's easier to just talk about it a little bit. I'd have to say, just from the top, this kind of a slippery slope. You should, I would say, being on many juries, that I don't think that really matters to the juror. I don't think you should try to speak to, the type of work or a particular focus that a jury member might have. I think there is a broad perspective and a broad group typically in a jury, and I think you might get off track on what's strong about your project if you're trying to communicate what you think someone else might like about your work. So I would definitely encourage everyone to stay on course with celebrating what's strong about your work, regardless of who you think the jury might be, which in most scenarios, if not always, you don't know who the jury is. You might know what city the jury might be coming from, but within each city, there's a broad range of professionals, and you don't know the individuals that are on that. I think that's typically withheld until after the submissions are in. So I would say, maybe from the top again, Stephen, I think it's probably best to focus on editing a strong submission that speaks to what you think is the strength of your project, and not what a jury member might be looking for. Because the jury members are typically looking for what's in the criteria in the local program. So stay on course with that, which is what the jury members are being tasked to stay on course with too. And then beyond that, to Michelle's point, resubmit, because it really is a different mix of individuals. The conversation might go in a different way. The criteria might even change from year to year. And you might make a better submission the second chance you have. I've found that if I would look at a submission, even that I've done from year to year, when I resubmitted, it's different. And it's almost always better the second time. So, the resubmit is a good step as well. So, yeah.
You
Any
can take
others?
photos for any season.
One thing I will also add, when we choose our jury city, we do think about what type of architecture is most common in that location. So say like Miami, very different from Pittsburgh, right? So if that is the case, then we spend a bit more time with that jury, giving them the context of what is common architecture in our region, what are some of the challenges, so they have some understanding of how things differ.
There's one more question in the chat from Robert. What are some examples or strategies of how community engagement, public input is represented or weighing into the design awards?
I'm happy to start that one. So I'd say two ways. One is AIA Pittsburgh started 2 years ago. This will be year 3 this year, having a social impact award. So we have, on one hand, we have a whole separate category that very much looks at those issues. But at the same time, one of the measures for design excellence in the framework, right, at least one addresses issues around design for equitable communities, where a lot of these elements come in. So if you do have social aspects to your work, absolutely, that is one of the framework for design excellence elements, and you can speak to that. And that is definitely paid attention to.
Also through the People's Choice Award category, where the public at large is able to look at the submissions as a whole group and provide comment, feedback, and indicate which ones the broad community is interested in. And that there seems like there's potential in that, can be even more.
Absolutely.
If I can add like one quick comment on like if you're planning to participate to juries, to awards that are actually national. So like there are people participating from different parts of the United States. A lot of times jurors take the approach of what kind of projects we want to see more of. So for example, our jury was really focused on regardless the very specific location, was the project making a place? What was the context? So again, the importance of like explaining what the context is, what is the big idea, and how you're making the difference. So and then like another thing that, for example, was noted was also the ratio between effort and budget. Like if you have like an ungodly amount of money, and it's something that's some people look at. And again, the jurors have diversity, so some people are more design oriented, some people are more numbers oriented, but that's also something that clearly let's say that it's always an interesting story when you can do a lot with very little. And Pittsburgh is a great place to do that.
Mhm.
One of the jury comment I've heard twice was that they would love to see more residential projects, especially some of the juries that were not really in our region, because they were interested just to see, since we have some of the oldest building stock in the country, like, what do we do with it? What are some of the renovations? What are some of the things, happening in our region? So I just wanted to mention that, because we really encourage, even though we don't have a distinct residential category, we very much encourage residential projects. And I wanted to make that clear.
That was actually also part of the national conversation. And it was interesting because some jurors were thinking, well, residential is, say, 80% of architecture built today, like what our firms do. But again, the importance between effort and ratio, and in the end, the conversation was like, is there anything new, anything important told about the, with a residential project? So I just want to caution, again, when you're telling the story, just let's not submit residential just because, easy win. It's not. It's even more tricky, I think.
Any last questions or comments?
This is good.
You guys are quiet out there. Well, I hope this has been helpful. I'm sure if you suddenly have a question, that you can always email the AIA Pittsburgh office, myself or Kira, right? And we will get back to you. So thank you so much for being here today. I don't know, Bea, do you have any closing comments, or are we? No? All right, well, thanks.
Good.
Go ahead.
No, I'm good. Thank you very much to our wonderful guests for sharing so many good tips. And thank you, Michelle, for sharing the behind the scenes. I think it's really helpful to demystify this process. And of course, not everybody is a winner, but it's important to be aware of, what is going on and be proactive as much as you can.
All
Thanks
right.
for the opportunity.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Good luck, everybody.
You started off with this earlier, Michelle and Bea, too. It's going to be fun to celebrate in person this year. So
Yes.
after the submissions are in and the jury
gosh.
process is done, we're going to be able to gather together. So that's really exciting to to think about this year.
I look forward to seeing everybody very much. All right.
Take care.
Bye.